Being a child of the 90s meant that I grew up watching Power Rangers, witnessing those super-powered teenagers with attitude kick monster butt every week, all while piloting their towering titan-like mechs. Few games came as close to replicating this experience for me than 2018's Override Mech City Brawl, which succeeded in some regards, but didn't quite turn out to be much more than just a schlocky brawler inspired heavily by Japanese mech fiction. Well, this colourful mech fighting franchise has returned in the form of Override 2 Super Mech League, and despite mostly being more of the same, it still manages to be a great party fighter to play with friends. I'm Aaron from Console Deals, now let's get into why.
When I was a kid, I dreamt of ranking up in the leagues like this, and
For this sequel, Override 2 has definitely gone with the bigger is better route, upping the previous game's roster of 12 pilotable mechs to an impressive 20, with an additional 4 if you pick up the deluxe edition. Still fun is just how much developer Modus Games isn't afraid to ape some of the most famous designs from the mech world, with Watchbot still very much looking and playing like an Optimus Prime ripoff, and mech-battler being a dead ringer for the Green Ranger's Dragonzord in a lot of respects. In this way, Override 2 serves as the perfect battleground with which to wreck shop using mechs that closely resemble those from your wildest childhood fantasies, though this time around there is an attempt to add a degree of authenticity to it all. Ultraman being included as a playable mech here is evidence enough of this, as while the iconic superhero character from the 60s is reserved for DLC, seeing him duke it out alongside other shiny robots using his trademark moves is a cool sight to see nevertheless. Override 2 doesn't intend to pride itself on being the tightest, most robust fighting game out there, and is much better enjoyed when you treat it like a virtual playset full of action figures. That's not to say that these large-scale bouts aren't satisfying though, far from it. The conjunctive melee-based combat from the first game yet again returns here, with the left side triggers on your gamepad controlling your left arm and leg, which act as light attacks, while the right side triggers allow you to land harsher blows using your mech's right arm and leg. Such a setup works well, and makes for epic-sized scuffles that can only be best described as crunchy. The 20 characters handle completely different from one another, enough that it'll be a while before you ever get bored, and all boast special abilities unique to just them whenever 2 triggers are pulled down simultaneously. Finding out what each mech's ultimate can do is always fun. Other maneuvers like dashing, throwing, jumping, and utilising any of the many different weapon pickups helps the combat in Override 2 stay fresh. Admittedly, the action can be a little tough to discern in free-for-all battles when there are 4 different hulking robots stomping about at once, but you can always engage a lock-on using R3 to keep eyes on just one target. Playing against the CPU in the various league types act as a nice primer for going head-to-head with other players online. Just bear in mind that fights typically lean on the easier side early on in the ranks. Speaking of leagues, Override 2 makes some pretty substantial changes when it comes to the single player campaign. There technically isn't one. Whereas the first game told an appropriately hokey series of missions about aliens invading Earth and the mech piloting humans needed to fight them off, here it's been completely gutted in favour of the league system. It's essentially a series of different match types you run through, either online or locally against bots, where you fight your way to the top of the in-universe leaderboard. There's some slight context given to your actions by way of expositional text dumps that appear between these fights, but it's a shame that there really is no semblance of a story at all here. Where this new approach does succeed, however, is in encouraging more personalisation. Early on in the league mode, you only have access to 5 basic mech types, but eventually you earn enough currency to purchase your own and earn the status of pro. Doing this grants you with the ability to visit the garage area and set your own avatar and icon, letting you stand out a bit more when competing in online battles. You can also personalise any purchased mech with a small selection of accessories, and while there's not a whole lot to choose from, at least right now, it did mean that I could equip my Ultraman with a flying UFO hat and yellow bow tie, so who's the actual winner here? Override 2 Super Mech League is another great installment into Modus Games' schlocky mech battling throwback, being a fighter that's best played in a relaxed setting with friends either online or locally. The lack of a traditional story mode and limited accessory options for characters is disappointing, but there's still a lot of joy to be found in rocket punching a giant metal goldfish into a 4-story building. If you've ever wanted to cancel the apocalypse Pacific Rim style, look no further. We give Override 2 Super Mech League a 3 out of 5.